Hello everyone, my name's God and welcome to GreatLakes-TCG, and here with another guide. This time we're focusing on Red Shanks. It seems to be Red Shanks week. I think there's been a couple other creators come out with guides for this deck, although I don't think a lot of them have anything new to say or anything really revealing. So hopefully with this I can help you out and we can come to a conclusion together. So Shanks. Honestly, this deck has been a little underwhelming for me. Even in Japan, he seems to have had a very high play rate, but a very poor conversion rate. Towards the end of Japan, like the Japanese meta, or the Eastern meta, I would say, it seems like they started figuring out some builds with more consistency. They figured out some more, tech cards to play, and we've kind of picked up the pieces from where they, where they left off, and seen some inspiration from their O10 builds to try to build our case moving forward with why I like to play Shanks the way I do. Just moving forward to try to talk about it, Shanks is the reason why I think Shanks is a little underwhelming is his matchup spread, at least in 09. As you can see, this is a little bit of a Christmas tree, but in red we have his bad matchups, even if they're only slightly unfavored. So you could see here, and I'll go through them very briefly. But in green, you have his good matchups, and even those are slightly favored sometimes. And this is also based on my testing and also the data that you can get regarding OP bounty. But essentially speaking, against Doffy, you're either tied if you go first, 50-50, or if you go second, his unfortunately, a little bit weaker, 40-60. Against Lucci, going first, you're winning. Going second, you're barely losing, but it is slightly unfavored. Against BY Luffy, it's really bad going first, but going second, you're actually doing, you're actually favored. Not by a lot, but you're actually going to get there more times than not. Against Blackbeard, going first versus going second, a little bit unfavored versus first for second. Against Purple Luffy, going first, it's just 50-50 based off the data, but going second, it's 40-60. And the reason why, and we'll talk about it once we get to the Luffy matchups, profile part of this, but I think the reason being is just Shanks' inconsistency versus Luffy being a super consistent deck is the reason why sometimes you just don't get there. Even though going first, if you see the right curve, you actually demolish Purple Luffy. In the mirror, and obviously if you let Purple Luffy go first, you're unfavored. In the mirror, whoever goes second is more slightly favored, but I feel like it's more or less whoever drops the first 10 drop. Against Nami, you're just going to get destroyed. Against Enel, unfavored going first, favored, or actually it's pretty even going second, I would say, because if you're able to get the first 10 drop out and it's a Shanks, you can go a long way. And then I guess I don't have it on here because I just don't think it's as meta relevant anymore. It's Bonnie. I just think you are favored in Bonnie either first or second. Control Shanks does really well into Bonnie. Now, before I go into more detail regarding the matchups, I do want to show you the deck list. But let me do two things first. Why should you listen to me regarding Shanks? I'm the Purple Luffy player, right? Well, the biggest thing is I have tested a ton of Shanks in the last 2 weeks. This is one version I tested. This is a different one. 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 This one's also a different one. This one's a different one. This one's also a different one. And finally, we have this one. I have tested everything from Noel's build to Quan's build to Jackson Huang's build. I've tested, every deck list for Shanks that I could, get my hands on and look at different tech cards, different variants, even going outside of the red hair variant, doing the rush variant. I have tested almost every version of Shanks, and honestly, this is why I'm kind of underwhelmed with the leader. Mostly because despite all this testing, and yes, despite him having some of the best top end that Red has ever seen, with a really good leader ability to help you get to that top end, relatively safely, we still are not seeing Shanks perform the way I want him to. He's not performing at the tier 1 deck that he should be at and that people are rating him at. And even in Jackson Huang's and Jonas's their YouTube channel, they released a tier list video 2 days ago, and even they rated him in A tier, but they said we have not found the best build for him, and I agree. But I'm rating him where he's currently standing. And this might change in a month. This might change in 2 weeks. This might change this weekend when we have this 09 tournament. Maybe there's a list that comes out that really shocks me. But at the moment, this is like a kind of a skeleton build. And I'll go through my choices or the reason why I like it. And I'll go over the tech cards that you can substitute into this build if you feel like it's necessary. So this is the deck list. Once again, this is not a final deck list. This is just my current list that I've been testing that has given me the best results across the board. Now, there's ways to tailor this deck towards certain matchups. Like say this ace. This ace is really only good against Blackbeard and Lucci. It sucks against everything else, really. So just if you're not seeing Blackbeard or Lucci, just throw it out, right? Same with Lucky Roo. Lucky Roo is really only good into Purple Luffy, can be decent into Doffy, but really not that good like otherwise. So if you're seeing less Purple Luffy in your meta, throw it out. So there's ways you can manipulate the deck to make it, more, tailored towards the meta you're expecting to see. Red Hawk, honestly, I hate this card, but I can't find a better card to put in its position because I know the strength of Rayleigh plus Red Hawk on 10, or even Dragon plus Red Hawk on 10. Because once you establish bodies that stick, being able to just sit there and counter out of their last few swings, even if you're at 0 life, you play like a Whitebeard type build where you just gather a bunch of countering cards in hand towards the end and just kind of survive. Especially because if you have a couple of these Shanks on field and they're just minusing 1k for the whole board, they really can't swing that high into you with a character at least. So especially if you played the control aspect correctly. That said, just to get really quick into the deck list, I kind of already gave my warnings that this is not the end-all be-all deck list, but essentially speaking, I think that this is as good as I could get to it, or I'm willing to work on it, despite testing everything. I don't think any of these cards need any explanation as to why they're here. I think the deck is very straightforward and plays itself. Marco has been probably one of the most underrated and best cards I have found in this deck. I think it's fantastic. Does it need to be played at 4? Probably not. But I like seeing it, especially in combination with Building Snake. It's a really strong combo early on and helps give you some element of control. Or you could combo with Otama sometimes early on. Dragon, I like having an extra rusher, that especially going into the mirror match. Having an extra rusher helps a lot. Beckman's just a counter card that gets a lot of value. Obviously, we're playing 2Ks. We're playing the Uta Searcher because I think you're trolling if you're not playing the Searcher. Why? Because I have gone to multiple tournaments. So I went to my most recent last week, my local game store. I played a Shanks version similar to this. I went X1. I think it was a little bit more bricky than this one. But essentially speaking, I played 4 Uta, 4 Shanks, and I only played 1 10-cost Shanks the whole, out of 5 or 6 rounds that we played. I saw 10 Shanks twice, and I played it once. That's all I had the ability to. And it's because I got pudding down the second time that I was going to play it. Regardless, even with the Searcher, you're still not guaranteed to see your top end. And if you're not playing a Searcher, you are even less guaranteed to see your top end. So I do think it's a little troll not to play Uta anymore. I think Uta fixes the deck a lot. Now, Gum Red Hawk. Once again, I don't like this card, but I don't see a card that's better in the slot, especially if I'm playing Marco. Now, if you're not playing Marco, I understand not playing events as much, but I think you need at least 6 events if you're playing Marco just to help protect it and be able to abuse his ability of a sticky body, and so you're able to push for game a lot more. Now, I do want to get into the tech slots. So, as you can see, look at all these fucking versions of Shanks, and I just override a bunch of them. So, tech slots. These are cards that I think are all potentially viable in Shanks. All of these. And actually, just to add to it, the stage. I've seen a lot of people play the stage for Shanks. Actually, let me see. Would that work? Where is it? This thing. So I've seen a lot of people start testing with this, and we'll talk about it. Sanji. Why you could play Sanji if you have trouble against Nami, or I guess against Blackbeard. It also helps a little bit. Personally, I don't think Sanji makes the Nami matchup that much better because it's already such a losing matchup. What, you're gonna go from 30 70 to 35 65, like it is what it is. Zoro, I think, is a tech card that is actually something I want to actively find a way to put into my list. I think running at least 2 Zoros is really, really nice. Why? Because if you're going first, you can put them on 3, swing 5/5. And then, or even late game, he could be an extra swing to go for game 2, and he's, fairly dawn efficient. But the bigger thing is that you can use leader ability to protect him. So it's not like other leaders where, oh, instead of swinging into your face and giving you a card, they could just swing into Zoro because, Shanks deters that anyway. And so putting out a Zoro, leaving it sideways, making them invest that Dawn if they want to try to kill it is actually very helpful, because that means on their 4 Dawn turn, instead of playing something that they actually might have some meaning, they're stuck playing a 2 or 3 cost character, which typically isn't that strong in most decks. Now, I'll get back to, so Whitebeard. The reason why I have Whitebeard out here, and I also have this other Whitebeard. Initially, the deck I was playing did have at least 2 copies of Whitebeard. I did take them out because I felt like without Yasop, I did not see combos with this Whitebeard enough or consistently enough to warrant running him. Instead, he ended up being a brick in hand more often than not. I just couldn't find times to play him even on curve. I found that it was slightly hard to actually get him to get a lot of value after his like initial KO. Like he'll KO something, then afterwards it was really hard for him to like be justified and get a lot of value. So he did end up in late in game, like obviously late in game, he was just ended up being a brick. Whereas like almost Backman's almost always a better 7 play. But like I said, if you're playing Yasop, then Yasop into Whitebeard or into Newgate is actually a really good combo that could be very good. Newgate can be played in your deck if you have trouble against Doffy, because this is really, really, really good into Doffy. But I guess like into Purple Luffy, it's really not that good unless you're comboing it with Stage. And this is why the Stage card, I really want to highlight this. I think that if you're playing Yasop and you're playing Stage and you're playing Utas, then Newgate can have an element of, much more value of being able to hit many more characters than it normally did. And obviously it has some synergy with Shanks. Like if you get the 10 cost Shanks out, that's already -1. Then if you have the Stage, that's -2. If you have Yasop, that's -3. Or you could just combo with now Otamas or combo it with your building snakes. So I think, I'm not saying Newgate's a bad card, but in the version that I have, I just couldn't justify playing it anymore. Now, why is 9-gate in here? This is not something people typically see. It's because a lot of people have started to actually venture into like more of a hybrid Shanks build with a lot of Newgate cards or Whitebeard Pirates, specifically the 5 cost Marco, 5 cost Ace, 7 Newgate, and now potentially 9 Newgate. With leader ability, you're basically an 8K character, at least for the first swing. So, and then finally, like on top of that, Newgate is able to pop a lot of those pesky little tiny blockers that people tend to play against Shanks, like the Robin, the Vasco shot, the even Onami actually in Purple Luffy too. Like so, any of those like pesky 2-cost blockers can get taken care of with this. Or if you are playing something like a Round Table, if you already have an established Newgate, could also be fairly strong. Regardless, I like Round Table. I don't have it in my deck currently, but in a very heavy control build, like it is playing Newgates or playing Marcos, you could Round Table plus Marco. You could Round Table if you already have a Newgate on board. It can basically KO anything. Round Table plus Lucky, or not Lucky Roo, Lime Juice. Round Table plus Lime Juice can basically make a Blackbeard blocker unable to block that turn. And typically against Blackbeard, it's not like how high you swing, but rather the number of swings you have. So being able to get rid of one of his blockers, like gives you an extra swing against him that turn. If you don't, like, say, have Zoro, for instance, like if you don't have another rush character. Baccarat was really, so now going to 10 Shanks. I do think KO Shanks actually has some merit in the meta. The issue is I think it's really only good against Purple Luffy and really only good against Bonnie, for instance. I think it's actively worse against Doffy, I don't think it's that great, and it has some targets in the mirror, like if you pop a dragon or pop a Rayleigh, but it's not like at that point I'd rather be playing the other 10 cost Shanks, right? Or I'd rather be playing a Roger in the mirror, rather than this, if that's what I'm going for. But I do think there's some instances, and especially if you're having a lot of trouble with purple Luffy in your locals, and you think purple Luffy is something that you want to tech for, throwing in like a 10 Shanks is actually pretty good. Baccarat. The reason why I like Baccarat is as a tech card for now is her ability turns all your bricks, and you play a lot of them. My version doesn't. I've actually minimized the bricks as much as I could, but regardless, it could turn a lot of your bricks into 2Ks, especially early on. She's not as easy to get rid of. Gets a lot of value as a blocker too. So I like her. I don't have her in my current build, but it's something to be, to consider. Yasop, I already talked about him. According to, if you play Yasop, you could play Newgate. They actually work together. Roger, I don't have in my deck because you have to play around him anyway. If you're playing into Shanks, if you're not playing if you're not playing around Roger, then it is what it is. I do think he can get some cheeky victories. I just haven't found the room for him, and he's not searchable. So at the moment, he's cut. But I could definitely see, manipulations to the skeleton. Say you don't want Ace in the deck, right? Take out Ace, throw in a Roger. We have room. We're not playing as many bricks, so you could always manipulate the deck to play Roger. You could always manipulate the deck to play Shanks. You could always take out some 2Ks and replace them with Sanji. Now, getting to Guard Point and Rad Beam specifically, I'm playing the Red Hawks. I've tried Guard Point and Rad Beam. Rad Beam is nice when it works, but sometimes you'll find yourself that you are unable to leave up that one extra Dawn, and the turns you can leave up one extra Dawn, you're actually already playing. It's because you're playing Rayleigh or Dragon, and so you're already leaving up 2 Dawn. And if I'm playing Rayleigh and I could leave up 2 Dawn, I'd rather just play Red Hawk, because then maybe I can get some value out of KOing something that Rayleigh's already subtracted, right? All right, getting into the matchups. So first things first is Blue Doflamingo. I think this is, the best card, the best deck in the meta. So it's something that we really have to go over. Let me just move my face down a bit. There we go. So Blue Doflamingo. I think that, once again, what I provided to you was a skeleton build for the deck. You could always manipulate the deck to do better into Doffy, but it might be worse into other things. For instance, Sevenbeard is very good into this deck. I just can't, how do I say, I just couldn't justify playing Sevenbeard into other decks, especially without Yasop, because I just don't think Yasop's a great card in a vacuum. So without Sevenbeard, I don't think Yasop is that good. That said, I think that, Sevenbeard's really good into Doffy, especially if you could establish a Rayleigh the turn after. But A-Cost Rayleigh is by far and away the best card into this deck. But I would say, if you can mulligan for it, it's great. Obviously, don't give up any really good early game mulligans. Say you get Hongo plus Building Snake, or Building Snake plus Marco. That could also be very, very good against Doffy, especially in the early game, to kind of control their ability to go as wide as possible against you. I will say I have tried both starving Doffy and being aggressive into Doffy. I've had mixed results. I think some builds are able to starve him a little bit better than others, depending on the amount of removal they run. One thing I will say, though, is I do think that typically my Doffy games do end up being a race to kill them in 2 turns. So typically I'll establish a large board, use my on place to kind of do all the KOing for me rather than swinging into their board. And then obviously I'll clean up with the rest of my attacks if possible, but they typically get countered out of. And then finally I kind of win games by establishing a wide enough board, controlling their board, and then kind of winning in almost 2 turns, doing 3 life, or 3 life, then 3 attacks to kill. So that is typically how a majority of my games go. So I don't think it's worth chipping at Doffy one by one every single turn, if that makes sense. You're better into life, you're better off just swinging into their characters. And making sure they give you their hand size. So then it makes going for game at the end in those 2 turns much more viable. Honestly, Doffy can be hard. He's going to go wide at you. He's going to go very fast and aggressive at your face. I would say counter out of the things that are easy to counter out of, especially if they only take one card. Your goal is to lift the 10 Dawn when you can drop a 10 Shanks, or like drop like a Rayleigh plus leave 2 Dawn up for a Red Hawk, and get insane pressure with that minus 1k across their whole board, because that's like, say they have a board of 3 or 4 characters, that's minus 4. That's 4 less counter, like 4 less K counter you need in your hand to survive that next turn. So it's just insane value with just one card. So once again, if you play 7-Beard, you can try and establish him on curve, and then obviously the turn after you could play Rayleigh. You could pop one thing, then -2 on something else and pop it. Like even a Jozu can get popped. But the optimal curve typically is like having a reducer early, plus Red Hawk, and then you go into Marco, and then you go into Beckman, into Rayleigh, into Shanks or Rayleigh plus plus Red Hawk. Like I said, Doffy's going to be one of your harder matches, but I think it's not nearly impossible. It's just, if they go first and they see the nuts, it's sometimes really hard to like keep up with that aggression. Next, Lucci. So the Lucci matchup's actually kind of polarizing, and it's really funny because a lot of people say purple Luffy is so dice roll dependent, but honestly Shanks is just as dice roll dependent, but his the polarization between going first or going second is not as high as purple Luffy's polarization, I would say. That said, going first is better into Lucci, and this is backed by data. The main reason is that you want to be able to avoid that large tempo swing that Lucci gets from that 9 Dawn turn of like an Ice Age Moria turn, where they're able to kind of basically answer anything you've put out the turn before. I would say that Lucci's a slow deck, so don't feel afraid to take away like the first 1 or 2 lives without even like even if they only swing 5 at you. Sometimes I do just take that first life because I think it could be beneficial to get build a hand and make sure you see the cards that you need to play the matchup appropriately. If you play a lot of rush cards like the Zoros I mentioned that I'm trying to actively fit into my deck, I do think that you do have an option of just really aggroing them down, especially if they don't see enough blockers, and especially because like say if you establish a Zoro or establish a Marco and then if they say they Sabo, you could always just play Beckman and destroy that Sabo like almost like in response on curve. Dragon. So the reason why Dragon's actually really good or mentioned in this matchup is because I feel like if they play, like say they're going second, a lot of times they'll play like Ice Age Jack and to pop a 7 cost that you've played the turn before, typically either Beckman or Whitebeard. Then you can, in response, put down your own Dragon. It'll be your 9 Dawn turn, and you're able to just like swing 12 into their 8. Typically they hopefully don't have like a Rebecca out from a turn earlier, if you're playing Marcos to pop the Beccas and stuff like that. So typically that's a really good response into Jack, because it basically makes their turn kind of mute, and then 2, you've once again established another card that they have to, like another 8 cost that they have to remove. And you're punishing them, it's just continued punishment, because then after Dragon, if the Dragon sticks, then you could just go ahead and play your 10 Shanks or even Rogers and then start punishing them there. So as soon as like one of your big characters kind of sticks, it's just so much easier to punish Lucci. So you're kind of asking them every turn, do you have it, do you have it, do you have it, do you have it? And honestly, Lucci, sometimes they do have it, and you just can't do anything. So yeah, like I said, generally good news is if 1 10 cost sticks, you basically kind of win the game there. So it's very beneficial to try to push them down and go for it. 10 cost Shanks is so good because typically Lucci builds a wide board and makes Moria just an 8k. And Rayleigh's also really good against Lucci because 1, it's an 8 cost, so it's harder to kill, but 2, it can like say -3 on Lucci or -3 on Moria, -2 on Lucci, and then pop a Becca. And so it makes the Moria and Lucci swing, if they do decide to swing the turn after, much less threatening, especially with your leader ability, because then Moria swinging 6k, then you have leader ability or even a 2k in hand just to get out of it. Lucci's at 4k, he'd have to give him Dawn to even make him swing. So Rayleigh's actually a really good survivability card. And then you're getting rid of a blocker at the same time too. Yeah, so once again, Marco and Ace are good in this matchup because they kind of stick. A lot of times I don't use Red Hawk that much in this matchup, or I don't leave 2 up for Red Hawk in this matchup because once again, Lucci's kind of slow. And so I typically just keep him for like Marco fodder. So if they destroy my Marco, I just use Red Hawk to bring him back. BY Luffy. So BY Luffy is a very polarizing matchup for Shanks. I think going first, you're much less favored than going second. Second, you actually are favored, especially if you can get a 10 cost down, because our 10 costs, one, they kind of stick unless they play Raigo now, so do watch out for that. But even then, if they're wasting a turn to play Raigo, it means they're likely not able to self-activate that turn. So there'll be like a 5k leader with 2 life, or maybe they'll go up to 7, 1 life, and typically your board is wide enough because they have trouble removing the rest of your board as well. So once you play the 10 cost, you can either follow it up with another 10 cost, or if you're able just to follow it up with even Dragon's really, really good in this matchup. Typically you want to starve BY Luffy, and by starve I mean don't attack their life until you've established 3 or at least 3+ swingers at the 6k or higher level. So Marcos, Aces, Beckmans, Rayleighs, Dragons, and 10 Shanks. Once you've done that, you can kind of like push into them really, really hard in one turn and ask for a lot of cards out of their hand, especially if they haven't activated yet. Or you just force them to use their 2Ks to activate, and then your 6k attacks or your 10k attacks, and your by the way, your bodies are actually at a high attacking stat enough, and Beckman can deal with Sabos once again. So even like punch Luffys that are protected by Sabo can get destroyed. So your deck actually can handle their deck fairly reasonably. I would say counter out of early, but like obviously, if they get the going second curve and they're able to chain Morias and they're able to, it's one less turn that they have to self-activate or like live through self-activation, so they can kind of keep, they can kind of keep themselves a little bit healthier. They draw extra cards, they see more cards, so that's why I feel like it's a lot harder to go first into them, because you're also playing your 10 cost a turn late, because they hit 10 before you do. That said, counter out of early attacks. You want to be healthy, especially into the later half of the game. You really want to be able to live those 11k attacks into you. This matchup is very skill based, I would say. If you know how to play BY or play into BY, those skills that will help you into this matchup a lot. Otherwise, Marco, I would say it should not be played on curve to get rid of, like, say, a searcher. I would keep them in hand just to get rid of like one of their babies that they play out early, just to like make it less consistent for them to be able to like Hiyori into a baby that's already on curve, like already on the field, and to get something out of life and start self-activating that way. Lucky Roo is actually pretty decent in this deck, not only as a blocker, but because it can pop basically any, like it could pop Punch Luffy, it could pop Rocket Luffy, can pop I guess non-protect Sabos, but that's kind of hard to predict. So Purple Luffy, unfortunately this is also a polarizing matchup. I think if you go first, it's probably 55-45, you're a little bit favored, but if you're going second, it's really tough. It's like probably 60-40, maybe a little bit worse. Essentially what you need to do going first is to really high roll them to keep up with their aggression. If they're high rolling you like building snake, so go first, building snake into Marco is really strong, because then you can kill either a Zoro on curve, you can kill a Bon Clay if they play on curve. You could also, like, if you Hongo and say they play 4 cost Kamazo, you could Hongo it and then play Marco to kill it. Getting rid of their 4 costs on curve is actually pretty good, because then anything helps to like minimize the attacks coming your way later in the game, especially because most things that they do play will have 6k attack. Then after that, if they were to say Luffy Taro after your Marco turn, then you play Beckman and just destroy their Sanji. So then it's just a plain Luffy Taro swinging at you, which isn't nearly as aggressive or threatening. And then if you play Rayleigh the turn after, you could, so say they Luffy Taro back after you Beckman, you could play Rayleigh again, pop another one of their characters, and then minus a Luffy Taro to be able to swing into with your with your other cards. I think this is all just super beneficial for you, and then because it helps you get to 10 a lot faster and safer, obviously. If you can counter out of early swings, you don't want to take too many because they're going to be going aggressively at your face. Because you want to also stay healthy enough to drop your 10 cost. I will say it's probably better. So say you go second, you have a lucky Roo out and they swing with their Zoro. It is just better to take the block there and KO that Zoro on curve, because it means that one leader, so if they want to play Luffy Taro out that turn, they can't do any damage to you that turn, because one, you blocked out of the first one and popped one of their Zoros, and then two, you have leader ability for the leader swing, so you actually can stay at a fairly healthy life early on. And once again, if you say like you want to save the Lucky Roo, it gets Sanji, it can get rested later on, it can get Usopp and get rested, so it gets a lot less value too. And also you're allowing that Zoro to get multiple swings in, so it's just better just to get rid of it right away. Sometimes with purple Shanks, with red Shanks, you could be super cheeky and go for life really quickly and aggro them down before. And sometimes they just don't have like the Gum Giants in hand to be able to like withstand being attacked that many times. Marco, I felt, is really good in this matchup because if you're able to save it later on, swinging 6s and swinging 7s into them if they're not seeing their 2Ks can be very beneficial for you. But like if they see the nuts and they go first, it's just such a hard matchup for them. Their 10 cost Luffy is super strong. Don't waste time swinging at their board. Typically, if they are showing that they have Gum Giant, because the majority of the time you're not going to get there unless you drop like 2 10 cost Shanks. Like by then you're winning the game anyway. Like even if they go first, if you're able to survive until 10 cost Shanks, it's just so much harder for Luffy to end you. Because remember, they're one of those boards that go wide. 10 cost Shanks is minusing 3 to 4k like on its own, so it's really hard for them to like end you. Blackbeard. So this is a matchup that I think is also polarizing. I think whoever goes second is just much more favored. Namely being this kind of devolves into a battle of 10 costs, but also Teach kind of wants to establish at least 1 or 2 Burgess before they get to 10. Typically it's a decent matchup for us because a lot of our on plays don't actually matter into them, and they don't typically start locking out our on plays until 7. So Marco still gets a lot of value even playing him on curve, because most of the time you're not locked out of on plays just yet. And the plan is really just to go wide as hell and aggro him down prior to him being able to like block her up with multiple 10 costs. And even then, if you see like two of your own 10 costs, like 2 10 cost Shanks is so strong into Blackbeard, because it turns their Blackbeards into like 10Ks essentially. So if you're swinging 12 and they're 10, they have to block and give you cards to counter it. So usually they lose from there on. Once again, if you have the ability to, if they swing their Burgess early, swing into the Burgess. Load up your leader, swing into Burgess. Why? Because Burgess and not the blocker are what wins them the game. Say they establish the blocker, lock out one of your 10 cost Shanks, and then swing 10k with Burgess. You just aren't able to continuously defend that, and you won't be able to continuously attack into Burgess because the 12k blocker that's sitting right there protecting his ass. And obviously he's KO immune. Sometimes you can get super cheeky with it. Sometimes I have found the ability to chain, like so later on in the match, after like say like their first 10 cost turn, they'll stop being able to safely use leader ability. So sometimes you will get on plays. If I have like a building snake, I'll just building snake Beckman the Burgess, as long as it's at like a 9k, or even sometimes Otama building snake Beckman just to get rid of the Burgess, or a 10 cost like Teach too, depending on what you have access to, or even if you have a Hongo on board from earlier. Because remember, playing out your 2Ks is fine in this matchup, because generally speaking they don't target them for removal, at least not early on, and you're able to kind of get a lot of value out like with Hongo later on. Like even like once again, turning that Teach into a 10k and then swinging with one of your 12ks or 13ks is really beneficial. So Hongo gets like establishing an early Hongo actually goes a long way sometimes too. But even then, even if you're like throwing 2k, like minusing 2k to a Burgess and then playing the the Beckman's nice too. Like you'll be surprised at how many times they're unable to safely use leader ability later on to the game. It's because their attacks are so hard, or I mean, so high. They just swing so much, and you have a lot of rush. So Shanks, go second. I think going second is largely favorable for Shanks in general. So you want to be able to, and that's me, not you guys. Let me just actually mute my phone. So essentially speaking, whoever goes second's favored, because like that curve of dropping 8-cost dragon into 10-cost Shanks is just so punishing. It applies a lot of pressure, and if you're unable to respond to it like appropriately, it gets hard. It gets really hard. Even if they play like their own 10 cost and swing into the dragon, it's like 11 into 7, right? So same thing as like, no, 11 to 8. It's minus, yeah. So it's 11 into 8. And at that point in time, you could just like leader ability, have a couple cards, and you'll get out of it. Your dragon lives. The next turn, you're just... So then you probably took 2 life from the dragon Shanks swing, and then you're taking another 2 or 3 life. Say they drop another 10 cost. It's just so hard. What I will say, one thing that's really important in this matchup is to save a couple blockers in your hand to drop 2 in a row after you 10 cost. The reason being is typically if they do have Roger, they like, so be careful not to take them down to 0 life when you're doing this, obviously, because even if they're at 0, then you can activate blockers. But typically, so say if they respond with a second 10 cost, you having 2 blockers makes that second 10 cost kind of redundant. So you're able to use a blocker, block out of that attack, and then the next turn you can kind of all in on to their life and kind of win on the crackback. And it makes it very hard for you to lose if you have 2 blockers out against Shanks, because even if they're able to pop one, they can't deal with the other, because they really can only pop one thing a turn. And so it's just beneficial for you. Once again, if you can get some like Hongo or Building Snake out on board and actually kind of survive to a late game, you can get a lot of like cheeky stuff, like KO stuff with Beckman, especially against dragons, against other Rayleighs and stuff like that. And then counter out early, because you really do want to, because you're going to get swung at with 12Ks at the end of the game. So you want to be able to like, you're going to take those ones. You want to be able to counter out early when you can. So that's kind of it for in terms of the matchups, at least the relevant matchups. I do want to go quickly over. So this was the tier list I had last week, or I guess a week and a half, or whenever I put up the Purple Luffy video. I was really high on BY because in my testing, I thought BY was doing very well, but because I was playing Doffy at the time as well. I was also testing Blackbeard and Lucci at the time. But this week I kind of focused a lot on Shanks and Purple Luffy again and Doffy. And I will say I do have a small update to my tier list. I will say, so let me go here. This is my current tier list. As you can see, Shanks has moved up from B tier to A tier. I think Blackbeard and BY Luffy have both, are like, so Blackbeard was always here, but BY Luffy right now I think is not an S tier deck. I still think it's a really good deck. Shanks, unfortunately, I still don't see it. I think he's a little too inconsistent. I don't think we have the right builds just yet. And this could change, like, right? Say we find the right Shanks build, this could easily go up here. But at the moment, I don't know if we're missing some red tools for it. I think the event that he gets, it'll be very beneficial for him in OP10. I know he's doing well in OP10, so don't get me wrong, but so is Blackbeard. So that said, thank you for watching. Once again, feel free to contact me on Discord, leave any comments, questions there, like the video, subscribe, and I'll be coming out with more content. I think I do want to do another one of those watch throughs and commentate on, like, what I think people did good and bad, like one of those videos again. Either way, till next time.